Okay, participants. Okay, we're letting the people in. Jude?
Yeah.
There we go. All right, good morning, everybody. We'll just wait to see, just let people log on, as it were, and then we'll get going very shortly. Right, I think we'll get going. So good morning, everybody. I'm Brendan Geraghty, the Chief Executive of the UKAA, and today we're doing one of our webinars. This has been a three-part webinar with Hall Lee, looking at all aspects of environmental and energy issues in the build-to-rent sector. And I think today is going to be the icing on the cake. I've had a sneak preview of the presentation, and there's some pretty hard-hitting stuff in there. So we're joined today by Hall Lee, who've been supporting us in delivering this. Ian Gow, unfortunately, is having a few connectivity issues, so he is online but not able to talk. But Lawrence Johnson is the guru on these matters. And he'll take you through the presentation. So just a couple of things. The presentation will be available online or on our websites immediately afterwards, and the slides will be made available, and there's some interactive pieces of that will be very, very useful. But I think what's most important about energy economics is that it is in the consumer world. So for the very first time, this happened sort of around this time last year, research from, I think, JLL and maybe Knight Frank showed that the cost of energy was the second most important characteristic when looking at moving into a different property. And that shifted what has been up until that point either a technical argument or something from early adopters bringing the energy issues into the home. And I think it's now that they're there, they're going to stay. But for those of us involved in build to rent and those of us involved in development more generally, there are some very profound issues we need to get over in order to deliver that consumer value. And Lawrence is going to take us through that. When I saw the presentation, I was very, very scared by some of the facts, but thankfully Lawrence has given me a great deal of hope that solutions are in place. But we are going to have to think differently, and we're going to have to act quickly. So over to you, Lawrence. Take us through this now. Thank you very much.
Sure, excellent. First of all, but hopefully everyone can see the screen. Can I just get a thumbs up? That's all come through. I'm assuming that is. So I'm going to crack on. Energy. Just a little bit about myself. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I've sort of come from an electrical background, and I have keen interest, as well as look after a small business or medium-sized business that looks at energy in a lot more detail, where it comes from, and particularly how much it costs. And for different markets and different sectors, this means different things. And when you come to sort of the residential sector, it's much more personal, shall we say. You may well personally care about where your energy comes from. You care about how much it costs. And of course, it has a more personal impact on you in terms of the quality, or if it's not there. So there's a general few things I'm going to run through here. First is a little bit about the industry, grid constraints, a little bit about carbon, and of course the cost of energy. I am going to start off with some pretty sort of bad news stuff, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, most definitely, and that is a very bright light. And both in terms of sustainable energy and cost of energy going I'm going to do a bit of egg sucking. I cannot talk about energy unless people understand it in context and perhaps how I understand it. When we talk about energy, one of the key things to remember about it is that it is the biggest contributor to global warming gases. And across the world, it is all 73% of not just CO2, but any global warming emissions are associated with energy in some form. So it is most definitely the most important aspect when it comes to looking after our planet, and obviously, of course, global warming, and the biggest impact that is probably going to have on us is the long term. If you're wondering whether it's different, this is global. The UK, the percentage associated with energy is even higher at around 83%. So there's, if you're going to fix one thing first and deal with the low-hanging fruit, energy is most definitely the first one, or one to definitely focus on. Something here, which again I showed to absolutely everybody, but it's sort of when it comes to energy in the UK, is the challenge that we're faced with. The size of the boxes here for the different energy resources that we come across in our day-to-day lives represents the amount of energy in the UK. This is from 2022, so it's, no, 2023. This is the latest data that we have, government data. So just to put it into context, so what have we got here? So the size, remind you, the size of the box is the amount of energy that flows through there. The numbers, if you're interested, is in millions of millions of barrels of oil equivalent in energy. So just they're all like for like. So electricity, as you can see over there at the moment, is what's that? Roughly a quarter of the overall energy in the UK is through electricity. Biggest ones, of course, are natural gas heating our homes and petroleum being in our cars. Now, most of you know is that as we transition over to heat pumps and we transition away from petrol and diesel cars to electric, effectively, when I look at what we're trying to do in terms of amount of energy and moving it into a different form, we're trying to fit that entire blue box into the orange box when it talks about heat pumps. And we're trying to fit that entire grey box into the orange box. And as you can imagine, it ain't going to fit easily. That is a real stretch. And but we are helped. We're helped by the fact that a heat pump is generally 3 to 4 times, sometimes better if you can get a decent M&E engineer to really optimize that, and therefore the size, because a gas boiler is less than one efficient, shall we say, whereas a heat pump is 3 or 4 times efficient. So effectively, it's about a quarter of that size. That natural gas has then got to fit into that electricity box. Petrol cars, well, electric cars, they are equally about 3 times more efficient than a petrol or diesel car when it comes to amount of energy, in terms of energy needed to generate it to what's seen at the wheel. So that is helpful, but nevertheless, even when they're about a third of the size, it's still a stretch for our electricity grid. So our electricity grid is under a bit of pressure here, and I'm going to swap screen and just show you something here. Hopefully you can see that the UK, this is just an interactive map that we built for the whole of the UK. In fact, it's got the entire world. Sorry, it's running a little slow. It's just my computer's just a bit of a donkey at the moment. So it's got the entire world's electrical infrastructure on it. But particularly for the UK, we have a heat map which shows available capacity in a particular area. And it's got every substation and the capacities at every single substation, which you can effectively drill down onto. Sorry if it's running a little slow, it's running slow at the moment. And we can see that, you know, a substation I picked at random has a certain capacity, has a last demand, and is a bunch of applications that are sitting on there. This is the issue that we've got at the moment, that local capacity may well be there, but I'm just going to swap the view slightly so you can see substations in a slightly different form. So if we have those areas that have got capacity are in green. green, those areas that don't have capacity in red. And obviously, as your development goes, needs more capacity, the number of areas that actually have that capacity becomes severely limited, which means that you are waiting for significant reinforcements to happen. And that, at the moment, for most developers, is probably the biggest thing. The cost of getting an electrical connection to your development is getting better, definitely getting better for us, and is not usually, we're finding, is the biggest constraint. The biggest constraint is the time scale for getting that because of reinforcements. And we're seeing things, we've seen applications for nothing big, you know, standard residential scheme, but been told 2030, 2035. We've even had, and I'm not going to name areas, applications that are 2037 before they can get power, which basically means the scheme cannot go ahead. I am going to do a little bit more bad news, I'm afraid, but I will get to some good news. This is really important, and I want to just share the scale of the issue here. So our grid, as I was talking about, the UK grid, if it's running flat out, every generator running, you know, be it coal, gas, wind, and everything else, the peak it can deliver is about 63 gigawatts. The applications for demand, residential, data centers, you know, new master plans, people with EV chargers, heat pump conversions that are signed and accepted and waiting to be connected is 120 gigawatts, twice the capacity of our grid if it's running flat out. An impossible figure. The only way we can deliver that is by like doubling the number of cables across the entire country. National Grid, the lot, which is almost impossible to do, or will take a long, long time. That's just a scratch of the surface. The sort of flip side of that is the applications for generation and demand that are waiting to connect: solar, wind, batteries, other generators, nuclear, all the other generators, is currently standing at 520 gigawatts, nearly 10 times the size of our grid. Admittedly, because of wind and solar, it doesn't all run at the same time. They are waiting to connect right now. That's going up by 1 gigawatt a day, according to National Grid. So there is this massive discrepancy that's going on. There's a lot happening, and Rishi Sunak made some announcements in October to try and resolve this situation. But if you are a small user trying to apply for power, you are a tiny dot. I couldn't make it any smaller on the screen. Of course, you would be a tiny dot in that massive application. And you are fighting against all of these applications for demand and generation. And it is getting really hard. Here is the key. If, though, you were to put on your own generation and storage, and then perhaps bypass our little our UK grid, and I use the word not necessarily fully getting into bed with it, but maybe just kissing the UK grid, there are opportunities here, big opportunities. The first good news story here is, because of this massive amount of generator storage waiting to connect, our grid decarbonisation is very real. We have commercial people queuing up to decarbonise our grid to zero carbon. Absolutely brilliant news. We have to be smart in the way we do it. Bit more bad news. I will get onto some good news eventually. We all hear about and have heard about the price of energy. Of course, things have come down more recently, but it is a real struggle for a lot of people trying to pay their bills. And the UK itself is particularly poor in terms of its price of its energy. It is very high. It is very much subject to market prices of gas, and I won't go into why and other such things, which has meant that it's fluctuated so high. And a lot of work's been done to try and switch that over so we're far more sustainable. And that will come from self-sufficient, and we can, of course, help protect people from the volatility of gas and big things happening over in Ukraine or wherever, which affect the prices. just drilling down on the price of energy a little bit more. Here is, what's happened to the wholesale price. Generally, it's been bubbling around 50 pounds per megawatt hour. That's the pure energy price. That's not distribution, everything else like that. Of course, it's gone completely bonkers. Cornwall Insights, obviously they've predicted, and it has come down quite considerably since then, but it's not necessarily going to go down that quickly. Certainly not going to go down that quickly if we can't get the zero carbon generation on the grid. That's important. Now, as we're talking about residential customers, they are protected by the capped rate, which is great news, of course, and they've partially been protected that. And that cap rate is, of course, coming down to help protect people over a period of time, but still remains high. We did a little bit of analysis back in 2022 when they were particularly high to have a look at the ratio between the average rental cost for a home versus the energy costs for them. And as you can see, it's a big proportion of their cost. You rent a place, and in certain lower rental areas, coming up to sort of 35 to 40% of their rental costs is associated with energy. It's a big factor going forward. So we do need to focus on it. So what can we do? Well, some of the things I want to just to explain is that if you are providing a development, you will think about the infrastructure and the energy systems that go into that as a burden, a capital cost. But you must remember that somebody is going to make a lot of money out of that. Even a small, relatively small 200-home residential scheme can generate about £11 million worth of revenue for somebody who wants it over the next 40 years, which is the typical sort of life expectancy of the plant if it's well maintained. And you can get a cut of that, quite a significant cut. You can take all of it if you take full ownership of the energy systems. And at the moment, that does generate, certainly when it's zero carbon, good profit margins for people. And just a little thing, even the wires, just the wires internally inside the building themselves for a small 200 scheme can generate £500,000 worth of revenue for the person that owns them. So these are valuable assets that you can take advantage of. So some of the things we've covered so far is grid capacity, the constraints, the high cost of energy bills. Looking forward, what could you do about it? Well, we can look at taking ownership of renewables, potentially storage on those systems to help facilitate the delivery of that building. But they have a high capital cost. And when it's already really getting more expensive with second staircases and other such things, it's very hard to want to spend more money on the building without having a clear understanding on whether that's going to have a financial advantage for you as an investment. And also some sites are very much more constrained, and you can't put on lots of PV. You can't necessarily put on big battery storage, but there are ways around that. It doesn't always have to be on site. So thinking about a system in a building, just a little bit. So the images here, you've got like the generators outside of your site. We always think about it as a residential scheme, as the power is just plugged in, I get my connection. It comes through the big national grid. I'll have a local transformer possibly in the building, bang, it goes to the users. So that model has to change. Think about that big circle of generation. Think about the big small circle of the demand. We have to rethink that. And the future is going to be slightly different. It's a lot more complicated. Inside your building, you may have generation, probably PV. Some may even have wind. But wind, remember, doesn't have to sit inside the building on the site. It can be remote, both on the grid or via private wire. You'll have EV charging that's sitting. You may choose to have a battery if you look like, because you want to take greater ownership of this benefits. Your energy demand, of course, is changing, and your heating system is changing. They're all very much different and work in different ways and are a bit more complicated to understand how they're optimized and how to get the best from them. The other thing that isn't mentioned, and I'm not going to go into too much, is the actual procurement of the energy itself. Now, obviously for residential, not like a commercial customer where you procure your energy, you may still procure energy or want to procure the energy on behalf of those residents, and that can be done. Or at least you'll be procuring the energy from the landlord systems and stuff. Where that comes from is really important, and taking accountability of it is also a new thing that's coming through. UKGBC has brought out standards for good, high quality procurement of energy, bronze, silver, gold. So thinking about those different systems differently, where can we optimize them? How can we get value from them? How can we make sure that they are done in a way that actually isn't seen as a burden, but as an opportunity? So we can take a look at the generation side of things. What are the benefits? What's right for my site? You know, you're not going to be able to stick a wind turbine on the top of every building. In fact, that's usually a very stupid idea. Except on certain types of buildings where there's new technologies coming through that don't have a noise pollution or a visual perception sort of thing. What's the right system for me for heat? I know a lot of some of these have had some poor press recently, but again, they are an economic decision in mind and a carbon decision through this. And the way we think about this for anything that's selected, and I will talk about this quite a little bit more, is that we like to assess things on their cost, both capital and operational, their carbon benefit, and the impact on capacity. We call it the 3 Cs, which is an easy way of assessing these things. Whenever you think about energy, what are those 3 Cs? And some people, of course, can think about more alternative fuels, not necessarily applicable for residential, but there's all sorts of things out there that can be considered. Obviously, not necessarily suitable for a standard resi scheme. So storage. Why is storage really important? Why will I bang on about it? Well, storage is your way of overcoming potentially high costs. Storage is your way of taking accountability of your carbon. And storage is also a benefit to help reduce peak demands, storing energy when there is capacity on the grid and playing it back when it isn't. And that has lots of potential benefits when you consider storage. Self-consumption, being able to prevent you from, if you generate locally more than you need, and I'll come on to these. Grid services, you can sell the capacity of the battery, you can get rid of generators, you can reduce your peak demand, you can take ownership of carbon, and allow you to access markets that you would never consider possible yourself, sort of thing, to generate revenue. Just to give you a flavor, what do I mean about it? Well, a box full of batteries, typical what you might buy now, and battery technology is changing rapidly, and people might be frightened by this, but it really is going through lightning changes at the moment with much better technologies coming through. But a typical 20-foot shipping container that could be found space, might take up a couple of car park spaces, can generate up to £100,000 a year in revenue. It could reduce your peak consumption by up to a megawatt at some point during the day. Not for long periods, but could do that. And it can reduce your emissions by 110 tons of CO2 a year by storing energy when it's low in carbon and playing it back when it's high. And sometimes you can mix some of these together to really optimize it and get the best from energy storage. So I'm just going to touch on some of these individually because I've got a few minutes left just to understand what I mean and why I think storage is so important. You may not, but you may have an excess amount of generation opportunity. PV on top of carports do actually have the luxury of a bit of roof space in this development. I know some don't. Or some sort of excess energy available, whatever form it might be that's going on. Sending that back to the grid is generally financially a disaster. The money that you get for it is usually very, very poor, certainly when it comes to PV. Because when you have excess PV, most other people have excess PV because it's particularly sunny and demand is low. So storing that excess is always a priority. You'll get 4 or 5p a kilowatt for that export of energy at those kind of times when everybody else is max. If you store it and play it back at the time when the grid needs it, or you can get 35p a kilowatt, or at least when your rate is maybe 26, 27 pence a kilowatt, you'll be able to use it, consume it, rather than take it back. So that's a real benefit for generation and consumption. What people don't realise and would never normally do is that if you have storage, the grid is desperate, it's hungry for it, and there are lots of mechanisms for making money out of it. And if anybody wants to go down into how these works and how you can model that, absolutely I can do that, but not for now. But there are lots of opportunities to support the grid for if you have storage available. Something else which is a bit more controversial, and I know every site is individual and there's all sorts of regs around these things, but you can, in the right conditions, remove a diesel generator, which is a capital cost, and potentially put a battery in which is layered up and doing other things to avoid that. It isn't always easy to apply it, but definitely is available for you. And that, of course, then means that you're zero carbon generation, and you can use the battery for other things. It talks about a battery for also then covering peak demand. And again, if you have a constrained grid, the grid can only give you 1 megawatt and you need 1.2 megawatts or 1.3 megawatts for your development. There can be a way to do that if you can store the energy off peak and then play it back to stop your development from going over that peak. Preventing reinforcement may not save too much in the capital cable reinforcement, but you could save significant time in that delivery. Going back to what I said around 2030 being not unusual for the connection times, 2035 for connection times for grid capacity, getting grid connections. This is a way around it. We talked about carbon. The UK grid is not some flat line carbon across the grid. It's quite controversial to say this, but different parts of the country have different grid intensities, which are much higher. And that's the reality of the grid. You know, in Scotland, there's loads of wind that is available, and perhaps not so much demand in some of these areas. So the difference in CO2 per every kilowatt is ginormous in reality. And politically, this is a bit of a challenge sort of thing to talk about the fact that it's more sustainable to build in the northeast than it might be in the south of England, where the carbon content is much, much higher on average. And actually, in a day-to-day and over the year, some of these places are a lot more volatile. From the south of England to the where have I got here? Sort of northeast England. You can see the volatility of some areas compared to the southeast of England. Huge dramatic differences. Taking account for that means that you can take account for different carbon. These interactive things, they don't all make sense now. I will show them afterwards. You can have a play with them and understand about grid carbon. Because the grid is constrained, actually telling the grid, I can work with you, mate. Don't worry about it. If you're constrained at 5 o'clock in the evening, when everybody's trying to charge their car, I can work with you. I can reduce my demand. Those kind of things are coming in. Those conversations with your utility operator are coming in. I won't go into wholesale market trading, but effectively, the simplest way I think is a lot of people have an economy 7 tariff, and it'll be cheaper at certain rates, simply by buying electricity and using electricity when it's cheap rate and playing it back when it's expensive rate means you can get cheaper overall costs. Something else, another revenue for energy is in a block of flats. You may offer some residential charging, EV charging. They make money, and there's no harm in doing that. You are perfectly allowed to do that and be quite reasonable. It's not unusual for a public charger, a simple, a standard sort of 7 kilowatt charger, if deployed in the right way and not necessarily upsetting people, local residents, and using energy and taking its energy from low cost sources, it's make £3,000 to £3,500 per charge point per year. So there's a great revenue opportunity available for these, and still be significantly cheaper for the residents locally than it will be on a public charge point. I've talked about lots of opportunities, lots of different things. Looking at the time now, I've got 10 minutes, that's great. And and they all become quite complicated. What's the best for me? So one of the things that's important, that a good consultant should be able to put these things together and help you assess what's the right thing for me. I've got constrained grids, I care about carbon, I care about the cost of electricity. Just a little bit of self-advertising kind of thing here, that we can do these things in terms of assessments and give you specific and bespoke to your site the ability to be able to assess these options. Do I put PV in? Do I actually contribute to a off-site wind turbine or a larger PV farm nearby? Do I put in a massive, great big battery? This is for a large master plan sort of thing. What does that do to my need for grid capacity? What does it do to my carbon? What does it do to my capex and my opex and my electricity? Those kind of things. And what does it do over a period of time when I'm trying to roll out a master plan? This kind of interactive thing makes all of those complicated things done, and you to make your own energy and investment decisions yourselves on what systems you are right for you, right for your investment profile for your site. The last thing, and I won't touch on this, is obviously procurement of energy. And I'm just going to put some summary slides, a couple of summary things I want to say. Taking ownership of where you get your energy from is really important. Some people think, oh, I've got a green electricity supply and I tick a box. I'm not going to go into it now, but I really think this is quite a challenging part that I think will get aired later on, of the way that the supply market, where you buy your energy from, it's got a little bit of a dirty secret that you think you're buying 100% green electricity. The truth is, if it isn't windy, and it isn't sunny, and it hasn't been for a few days, energy is not coming from zero carbon sources. No matter what, if they tell you it's 100% green, that is not true. And you must get our heads over that. It doesn't matter. Your energy is very unlikely to be backed that it will be 100% green when it's been very cold, no wind, and hardly any sun in the depths of winter for 2 or 3 weeks. It will be coming from gas. It will be coming from coal. You can bypass some of these things and take ownership of this. Try to reduce your demand. Rely on your storage. Procure, if necessary, over-procure your own generation. Help you overcome those times when the grid does have to rely on gas and coal. And there is new guidance that's coming out to help you do that. One of the key ones is UKGBC guidance, which we contributed towards. And I won't go into this, but again, if anybody wants to talk about this in more detail, I'm more than happy to do that, because it is a bit of a controversial subject, but it's one of those ones that I think we really must start talking about. Something I'm going to go will be available for you at the end is that there is an interactive one. Please, these are very generic, just to give you an understanding. Is if you've got a residential scheme, that we've given you a bit of a very rough steer in terms of if you can fit any PV on the top of the roof and you do want to put a battery in, what is the benefits of that? What might be the investment and return? Please do not take these as gospel. Obviously, a case-by-case basis is really important. And is there an optimal size? Is it going to work out for my site? Obviously, this has to be done, but this is just a generic one. You know, what's the payback if we're putting in a battery? You know, here we are. Payback is, for whatever I've just dialed in, for a 1 megawatt battery is 6.8 years, and it will. You know, what is the total revenue that you make out of it? 5.4 million for whatever that is. A 1 megawatt hour battery is about a 40-foot shipping container. Like that. So do that. That's available for you to play with afterwards. Summary, I think I've spoken to almost enough. So I will go back to 3 C's. Please ask your consultants, ask them to assess this. What is the impact of that energy system? Every part of the energy system of the building, over its cost, its carbon, and its capacity. So I wanted to talk about some of the things, just recap on the bits and pieces we spoke about. So we're going to an all-electric future, both in the demand and the generation, and that has to include storage. We need to be smarter in the way we model that. We need to understand how the peak demands can potentially, and managing those peak demands can potentially unlock a constrained site. Renewables, people think about them as a capital cost. If they are designed well and you've got a good consultant on board, you shouldn't be thinking about them as a capital cost. They should, if they're designed well, be a revenue-making asset in all cases. Battery storage, doesn't be battery, people think about lithium, but there's lots of other energy forms of storage. But energy storage is integral to delivering our net zero carbon future, and putting it behind the meter in your developments usually is the most valuable thing to do. It can reduce the peak demand. It can optimize any PV that you've got. It can generate revenue. It can save carbon. It can reduce the peak demands on there. And it helps you access energy markets to be able to generate some revenue from them, so they become a valuable asset. Right now, if you were to flatten a piece of land and build something on it, right now, in the right place, you can probably make significantly more money from providing batteries than you can from most other land uses right now, because they are so sought after, certainly at pace, if it can be done at pace. Electric vehicles, again, people think about it's a burden. They go, oh, I don't want that. I just give it to an operator. They'll sort it out and run it for me. Run well on the right site, sized well, in a smart way, with the energy procured correctly, they make money and should be seen as an investment. The next one is, of course, taking ownership of your energy procurement. Where does it come from? Do I know where it comes from? Am I just ticking a box with REGOs and other such things? Is there something better here? Absolutely take ownership of that. If you have multiple sites, putting them together can actually help you access other energy markets, because obviously a single development, 200, 400, 300, 100, doesn't have much access. It's a relatively small scheme. It can still take benefits. Everything has to be done on a pro and con, but you can bring sites together, aggregate them together, access more energy markets. The last one is I just want to talk about is obviously, a good consultant should help you visualize things, help you understand, is this a burden or is this an opportunity, or whatever system it is. And that was it. That was the last of my presentation. And I'm happy. I'm guessing I'm doing Q&As now, if we've got time for that. Is that correct?
We do. Hi, it's Graham Sibley here, standing in for Brendan. I know Brendan introduced you, but Graham Sibley here, Marketing and Operations Director for UKAA. So thank you, Lawrence, for that. As Brendan said, there's some really enlightening and in some ways worrying stats you put up there, but I think you explained what the opportunities are as well. I haven't seen any questions come in through the chat yet, but please, if anyone does have any, please do submit through the chat. Lawrence, from my point of view, I think you've done a lot there around. You mentioned at the end you've had a new site, brand new site, flattened it, etc. Lots of advice there. For operators of existing sites, what are the challenges or opportunities if you have an existing site and you want to do a lot more with your energy?
So an existing site's really great, because first of all, with a new site, you're predicting what the opportunity and benefits of technologies that it might play on there. And it's a bit more of a gamble, because you don't really know it's going to play out. The benefit of an existing site is you've got operational data on how the building operates, how it's occupied, the systems, and cars, how many people cars they've got, whatever it might be in there. And by using operational data, you've got a baseline which can show the improvements that might be. Do I stick a few PVs here? Do I put a carport over? Can I make money from these electric chargers here? What's the surrounding market like, kind of thing? And obviously, if I lose a car park space and stick a battery on, I've got baseline data. So an existing site is really helpful for us, because we've got good data and we can be far more accurate over the benefit of any of those technologies that you might want to deploy out on there. And obviously, in an existing site, some of the technologies have had their investment. They're already gone down a path. You either got a heat pump, or you've got a gas boiler, or you're tied up to some ambient loop or heating system here. So they are perhaps a bit more constrained, but it's more great nuggets of opportunity will stand out from that. And that's quite a quick process. You know, effectively, we can get hold of the energy data for the building, and that can be done. Sometimes it needs monitoring, sometimes if there isn't data sets there, but it allows a quick exercise to be done to go, right, fine. You effectively take that energy data. We know what the benefits are of those batteries. You can shove it into the interactive thing and go, right, let's just stick in a small battery. What happens if I did take some money from those EV chargers? What happens if I stuck in a small PV up on the roof? You can, with quite confidence, understand whether there is some benefits from those. And that means that it's not a complex story here that people are guessing, and you can have some fairly good reassurances from us doing that kind of assessment, and whether you want to go ahead with it. And then, of course, you can go to third parties then, because you've got a reliable customer base. Third parties will then go and invest if you don't want to invest yourself. They'll go, well, I know I've got that, so I've got a pretty safe case here. I've got data, you've given me the data. I've got a guaranteed customer on the end of it, so I'm not taking that risk. So going out and getting funding, if you don't want to do it yourself and if you don't have it, is a much easier thing to do. Certainly once you've proven the case already for them, you go, here you are, who wants this? Who wants this revenue stream kind of thing? And that's a really powerful thing for an existing case.
Yeah. Thank you. I've actually got a question just come in from James Parger. Hi there, James. Hope you're well. And he's asking about the most worrying thing for him is the current capacity of the national grid. To what extent is this a policy issue? So, for instance, might a change in government improve the approach to upgrading this, given the Labour Party stance on green energy?
Right. So there is a political side, there is a regulated side, and there is the physical reality of the systems that are on the ground. No politics can change the reality of the situation that sits on the ground. And there are a bunch of existing contracts that would take a brave government to step in and change. They are already making some changes to those and saying, look, some of those are a bit speculative, mate. You don't own the land, or you haven't got planning permission for it, so get out. That's something that's really important people need to be aware of, is that the utility companies have been given teeth here by the from policy through Ofgem to be able to claw back capacity that's not being used, which will help, of course. I haven't been too close. I did look at Labour government's policies. They were looking at things like nationalising the grid and making huge investments, which is a highly costly thing to do. I don't think they're going to be doing that going forward. And when they get stuck into it, no matter how bullish they are, they suddenly realize how hard a job that is. I expect a slow shift in either way. Whatever happens is, whether you like the current government or not, what's been set in motion is to decarbonize our grid, and there is now a pathway to make it zero carbon, which was the main challenge. That pathway isn't yet clearly understood, and it's that short pathway and the route that will become an issue. I'll give a little bit of a nugget information here. The government did, back in October, make an announcement that they may prioritise those developments waiting to get connection in certain sectors. They mentioned one sector only, which was in industrial or manufacturing. They made no other mentions of any other sectors. So having a voice and making sure that your sector is heard and is prioritized because they form part of a political change is quite important in this. And it'll be interesting to see how after the election, whether those things still stand.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly a large part of build to rent sector's drive is towards decarbonisation and ESG investment overall is driven towards that. And certainly UKAA in its role as if you like, the voice of the sector would very much want to take that forward. So there's a very clear message there from you about that needing to be part of our policy commitments and communications with with all parties and policymakers then.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. Okay. One other point I just wanted to pick up on, you mentioned about how much of energy is truly green when you're procuring. That was, I wanted to ask about procurement anyway. You went into more detail, but that fact of if you are in the middle of winter in a non-windy area, what advice could you give to our audience to maximize or optimize the amount of green energy that they can procure?
So there's different avenues that are available at the moment. The most and the fastest way and the most accountable way is probably the hardest way. I.e., stick as many PV as you can on your roof and stick a wind turbine on, or have a look at the immediate surrounding and see if there's any of that around there and try and work with those constraints. Now that I get in the centre of London, you've got a very low chance of doing that. But there is another avenue towards that, which I know the grid is constrained, is taking ownership of where your generation is coming from. And there's no harm in your generation being still located up in Scotland. In fact, the best place to stick wind is always going to be up in Scotland, because it's got access, or out in the sea, where it's got access to the greatest wind. And the bang for your buck is always going to be better. You put £1 in a wind turbine up in Scotland, you're going to get 5 times more in terms of generation out of it than you will do trying to stick some pathetic wind turbine on the top of a building in the centre of London. It doesn't make sense, sort of thing. So please don't think about it as it having to be a location specific thing. And then working with that when it's generating, when that energy theoretically can be getting to you, helping the grid to prioritize and decarbonize local generation, because you're optimizing your demand to when low carbon energy is available. So you're encouraging the grid to maximize and get that power down to London, southeast, whereas southwest in the winter, or whatever it might be, to encourage a change on the grid because customers are asking for it. So there are ways around that. There's a model that's really interesting, just to name drop a few people, a company called Ripple. They're really innovative, where they're both commercial and domestic people can take ownership of their supply. And a commercial company can do this. Effectively, they are building wind turbines. The company is set up, which is then owned by you. So effectively, you will put in a few £1,000s worth of money, which will buy a percentage of the capacity of that wind turbine. That can be bound to the corporate company that runs a building, as well as a personal person. And effectively, that's your wind turbine. And then that can link you, because the data is available when it's windy, when it's not, work your building with it. By doing that, you're encouraging the grid to decarbonize and work with that capacity. And that's a brilliant thing, because it can save huge amounts of money, and it's a good investment, absolutely good investment. People are saying, even in that model where you're not fully owning it, that you're getting 5 or 6 years payback on your investments. And wind turbines are good for 45, 50 years plus, sort of thing, with maintenance. So absolutely makes sense.
So given the long-term investment nature of build to rent, that makes absolute sense to take that long-term view.
It is.
Absolutely.
And there's a thing called community energies, where you don't have to be the landlord, but you can actually ask relatively smaller individual dwellings to be part of that. Get them to share part of this. You have procured an energy system. They will always have choice of supply, but if the one that you are procuring under a community energy, or community energy does allow you under small hours to prevent them from having choice of supply, and they have to buy your energy from you. And that's not unusual for things like heating systems, or district heating systems, where you're forced to buy your heat from there, whereas if you're a gas, you can buy it from anywhere, or if you've got a heat pump and domestic there, you can buy it from anywhere. But it's not unusual to that, and you are allowed to do it in isolated case in smart. So community energy is a way around it to take ownership for your people. But even outside of that, honestly, if you're procuring your energy directly from a supplier, directly from the generator, what you can offer usually well understrips what they can get from the commercial market. So there's lots of different applications. And again, a good consultant should help you detwine. That's a lot of legislation associated with it. And that's one of the things that I think becomes a political thing, is that the government actually unlocking those constraints and allowing people to take ownership of their energy, but still, allowing people choice of supply is a really important step that needs to be made by whichever government comes in the next few months.
Thank you, Lawrence. There's no other questions which have come in, so we are within time, which is great. Lawrence, I think you shared a huge amount of expertise and knowledge there. I found that really fascinating. And thank you to you and to Hawley for not just today's webinar, but the whole series of 3, which should come together very well and knits together very well. As Brendan said at the start, this recording will be going live and will circulate details, and that's alongside the other 2 webinars we've already run with Hawley. And I just want to say thank you, Lawrence, again for all of your input there. Just a couple of points from UKAA's point of view. The webinars that we do are continuing. Next week, we've got one on carbon reporting and the road to decarbonisation. So continuing the environmental theme for Build to Rent. That's being run by Arb & Co in conjunction with Long Harbour. And it's a case study in carbon reporting measurement there. And that's on the 19th of March from 10 o'clock. Details can be found on our website for registration for that. Also, I'd like to announce we have just launched the full programme of study tours in the UK, where you can go and have a deep dive into Build to Rent, going live into cities, learning about those cities and what's actually happening in them, going around a variety of BTR developments. Those are going to be my list here: London, Manchester, Milton Keynes, Nottingham, Leicester, Glasgow and Edinburgh. So you can get a real flavour around the whole country. But we have published the programme. You can choose which one you'd like to go, or several if you'd like. Again, it's on the UKAA website under events. All I say now is thank you again, Lawrence. Thank you to Hawley for everything you've done on these webinars, and we'll see you all very soon. Many thanks.